I am fortunate enough to know about when I will die, so I thought about how I wanted to die and leave a legacy for my children and grandchildren, introducing myself to them so they can get to know what kind of man their grandfather was. I started working on this project when I knew there was little time left to live. I wanted to share my thoughts and experiences. I was placed in hospice because of my COPD. I also have cidp, a rare autoimmune disease. Basically, my body is eating away at the insulation around the nerves. This makes speech difficult, and I have challenge with my motor abilities, such as difficulties keeping my hands and feet still, which you may notice. I also need to include a trigger warning for suicide. I will discuss suicide not in a graphic manner, but in my experience working through my own depression.
How to die. I'm fortunate to know about when I will die. So I've thought about how I want to die and leave a legacy for my children and grandchildren. This way, introducing myself to them so they can get to know the man their grandfather was. I want to talk to you about the demons that push toward death. First, I'll address my own demons. To give you some background on myself, for 30 plus years I practiced as a therapist, dealing mostly with patients who were mentally ill and or had addiction. Those things are mostly inseparable. Mental illness has been a constant companion throughout my life. It began with major depressive disorder and PTSD when I was just a child, and will be a demon I will have to cope with throughout my life. As far as physical illnesses, I was an athlete for about 30 plus years, which brings its own physical complications. Over the last 3 decades, I have been dealing with chronic pain due to spinal cord injuries. I have COPD, which is bad enough to put me in hospital. My most recent diagnosis indicates I have cidp, a chronic illness which destroys the insulation around your nerves and neurons. In short, it makes my nervous system fragile. I tell you this not for sympathy, but to give you context on my perspective. There are many people who suffer worse illnesses than I do. My son is battling his 3rd round of cancer since age 19. Watching him fight this illness with the awful pain he continues to experience from a wide variety of symptoms has been incredibly inspiring to me. Another powerful demon is mental illness. In my early career, I remember helping co-lead a group on grief with patients that had a variety of mental illnesses. Each patient had a chance to share an example of loss and how they handled their grief. There was a young lady who suffered from schizophrenia, which I consider to be the most severe form of mental illness. When the lady shared, she said, "Of all the things I've lost, I miss my mind the most." I found that incredibly tragic. Nevertheless, mental illness of any kind can be severe enough for someone to want to take their lives. The sad truth is that mental illness is treatable, with some fairly new methods of treatment available. However, not enough professionals and resources are available to treat those who are mentally ill. Since the 1970s, I have seen states shift the responsibility for mental illness to private corporations, which has made help unattainable for many of those who suffer. Suicide is another demon. There's no easy way to talk about it. When you discuss suicide, most people fall into one of 2 categories. The first are those who have tremendous anger for the person who died, for reasons such as feeling that the person failed to reach out to them. The second are those that feel they failed the person somehow and could have helped them. People tend to look for someone to blame, which fuels the anger and prolongs the healing process. It is unfortunate that most families do not have the skill set which could create a safe space to talk about suicide and the struggles that lead up to it. This is another unforeseen consequence of the state's placing treatment in the hands of private corporations. With this decision, there is a lack of education for those suffering and their loved ones, because everything comes down to budgeting and the bottom dollar for treatment. Treatment should be available for everyone who's suffering. In case of suicide, most people think they would have had a chance to change their loved one's mind. Unfortunately, once they have made the decision, they will not reach out for help. They will go through their plan and there's no blame to be placed. Starting at a very young age, I believed I would die when I was 35. No idea where that came from. And I know others with whom I have spoken have had similar thoughts. Different ages perhaps, but same thinking. So as I could justify the decision to take my own life, I can also understand the motivation that others experience. I think about many that take their own lives because of a severe illness that they do not want their families to continue to see them suffer from. I don't know about your perspective on suicide, but I can share my own experiences. I've thought about suicide many times and how I'd go through with it, which is one of the reasons I chose the profession I did, working with those who struggle with mental illness. One of the qualities I inherited or learned was a strong, stubborn streak. When I was 21, I was having an especially bad summer depression, and my desire to end my life was intense. I had very seriously thought about committing suicide, but to me, suicide would mean I had lost. So I made a pact with myself. I wanted to outlive my desire for suicide. I decided that my depression would not kill me. Rather, I would die from old age or a physical illness. To me, that would mean I had won. So then what happens when you won't choose suicide as an option? and suddenly you turn 36. This desire to end our lives comes from demons, our demons. When I say demons, I don't mean in the religious sense. Rather, I'm talking about any physical or mental illness that are severe enough to cause someone to consider ending their life. For me, suicide was the ultimate demon. Suicidal thoughts come from a profound sense of aloneness. And those thoughts can become very dark. After an exhausting emotional struggle, when they've made the final decision, they often feel a sense of peace, knowing that the pain will finally end. This is a consequence of society's lack of preparation to treat the mentally ill, a lack which we've allowed all in the name of tax cuts. My decision about suicide came as the result of the accumulation of anchors that have pulled me toward life. I do not disparage those who commit suicide. They reach that point after an emotionally exhausting struggle with their misery and agony, where they believe relief can only come from ending their lives. Think to yourself, how will you assess your quality of life if you had such an agonizing, mentally and or physically painful condition? Constantly, with no relief, as those who commit suicide often have. How long would you stay strong with no relief 24/7? I often describe that level of loneliness as being what Christianity's hell might be like, the agony of the ultimate sense of aloneness. Now, as a sign of progress, in California, the law allows for certain individuals to die peacefully through assisted suicide. In my next video, I will cover more demons that push us toward death. Another illness I'm going to talk about that pushes us toward death, and that's PTSD. A large group of those who suffer are veterans. We lose a lot of them to suicide because of shame or resources that are just not available for them to utilize. On the other hand, there are those who grew up in violent households, which cause an early form of PTSD that is often missed and mistreated. When I look at the Middle East, I see a whole population that will be living with this devastating disease. And this brings me to my pet peeve about wars. When I look at the October 7th war, most people acknowledge Israel's right to protect itself. However, it's a ridiculous concept to believe they must destroy Hamas to survive, and at the same time creating at least 2 generations of radicalized Palestinians. There's just no justification for an inhumane war. I've watched America's wars since Vietnam. It is amazing how politicians call on our heroes when they start a war. Yet when they come home, damaged in so many ways, those same politicians are busy looking the other way. I'm not sure how many times I've seen hiring and firing of new head of VA that's supposed to improve the veterans' medical care. We watch the cycle continue with no substantial change. In my opinion, President Bush 41 was very courageous in resisting the bullying from those around him. He had a clear mission, and once he accomplished his goal, he refused to prosecute the war across the Iraqi border. There are a number of groups that I've watched suffer because America made them second-class citizens from the very start, such as African Americans. This group of Americans has suffered PTSD since the very founding of this country. Why would they need the permission of white people to claim their God-given rights? Mainly I'm referring to people of color and also women. Their communities are doing an amazing job preserving and reclaiming some of their American heritage. As for reparations, the enslavement of the African Americans is a blight on the soul of this country. And we, the richest nation in the world, can certainly afford to pay those we have disenfranchised. Christianity is quite clear that we don't have the right to sit in judgment of others. Christianity also teaches the kingdom of God is not of this world but of heaven. There is a group that call themselves Christian nationalists who are politicizing religion to help them gain and maintain power. They are neither Christian nor national. This group is primarily based on white supremacy, originating a short time before World War II and becoming the Nazi Party. Racism is something that in its own right is a mental illness. Of course, these types of Christians do not reflect the majority of the Christian faithful. We'll talk more about the faithful in a later segment. Christianity is not the only religion to have committed atrocities in the name of a deity. Every major religion has their own history of crimes against humanity. Religion is just one force. Another is racism, which has a powerful impact on separating and isolating groups for persecution. We are living in a time when people are losing God-given rights instead of gaining them. Another illness that pushes us toward death is chronic pain. With current hysteria over opioid addiction and overdose deaths, the treatment of chronic pain has suffered. I have 3 spinal injuries and degenerative discs that have caused me considerable pain over 3 decades. There have been times when I doubted my likelihood of surviving my disease because of the severity of my pain. I've been fortunate to have had 2 cervical ablations that have been very successful. Unfortunately, my thoracic ablation was not. Chronic pain that is not adequately treated can easily drive someone to suicide. And because of the concerns over opioids, most chronic pain is inadequately treated. I have known people who committed suicide because of the severity of their pain. It is difficult to be in recovery from addiction in a 12-step group and need narcotics to get you through the day and help you live. I experienced the difference when I was placed on hospice, and for the first time in decades was able to sleep through the night because my pain was appropriately managed. Nobody worries about addiction when you're dying. Since my pain is well managed, there is no opioid craving. The roller coaster is gone, leaving the ease I'm experiencing from pain relief. I notice the same effect on those who treat their pain with methadone or buprenorphine. When their dose reaches their therapeutic level, they're able to lead productive lives without debilitating pain. In the next segment, I will cover anchors, those parts of my life that pull me towards life.